What's up there, guys? Thanks for tuning in. This is Rick and you're watching Fanfare for the Conscious. In the video today, I'm going to be covering asset-backed, fractional reserve and fiat currency. Let's dive in. Today I'm going to be discussing various currency systems and how they sort of have evolved from the basic bartering concept all the way through to the current fiat currency system of which we are a part at the moment. And I'm going to highlight a few of the areas why we might want to change that, shall we say, and how these systems of fractional reserve and fiat currency have actually served to enslave us and impoverish us overall. So before we start going into the various currency systems that you could consider, we need to understand what currency actually is. And currency itself is a medium of exchange whereby goods and services are represented as a token of value. Now, the reason this sort of evolved coming out of the barter system, in barter system you directly exchange goods and services. Now, unfortunately, that direct exchange of goods and services whereby I would offer you, say, 10 apples in exchange for 5 courgettes, or 10 apples for 1 goat, or 10 apples for X number of hours of work, is that it necessarily limits trade between individuals. You can only trade with somebody directly who has a service or product that you need at that given moment. And that necessarily limits the ability for that energy exchange to occur within a society. The benefit of having this token is that you can trade with an apple farmer even if you don't necessarily need the apples, because you can use that token of exchange to then trade it for something that you really do need. So you can give the apple farmer something that he wants, he can give you a token that represents that same amount of value, and instead of actually having those apples, you have that token of value which you can then exchange for somebody else. And eventually it will come round to a person who does want those apples, and they will go and claim those apples from the farmer. This again gives us a little bit more scope to engage in trade between various living beings and allows us to sort of work together in a more holistic manner. So the idea of having a token of value is very, very important. I won't take that away from it if we really want to have a nice fluid method of exchange, and the understanding that everybody is able to offer a service or product which is of use to somebody, then we do need to have that token of value. I won't argue that point. However, I'm going to talk a little bit about how that system of tokens of value has been manipulated in order to impoverish us as lawful living beings. So the first thing we're going to talk about is having an asset-backed currency, which was the original sort of currency. When you think about pounds sterling, the British currency, pounds sterling, that literally did mean at one point a pound of sterling silver. It was literally backed by the asset which it claimed to be. You could go into a bank with your £1 note and claim £1 of sterling silver. Now, unfortunately, that's not actually the case anymore. If you tried to go into the Bank of England with a £20 note and claim £20 of sterling silver, they would turn you away and laugh at you because there's no actual value attached to our currency anymore. And we're going to talk about how that process has happened over multiple generations and multiple changes in the way the system worked. So we're going to talk about this in terms of apple farmers today. Now, you could imagine this as gold merchants or corn farmers or dairy farmer. You could imagine it in terms of many different products or services, but apples is the one that I'm going to use today. So in an asset-backed currency, each token is directly transferable for the product which is backing that currency. So you want to trade with Mr. Apple Farmer. He wants to buy something off you. Let's say, it could be anything. Let's say you are a builder and he wants you to build something for him. But the only thing he has to offer in return as an apple farmer is apples. Now, you've already got plenty of apples because you've got an apple tree at home and you don't need any apples from the apple farmer. However, you recognise that there is, this need to engage in trade and that somebody somewhere in the world, somewhere in your community will want those apples. So if you can have a token that represents those apples, you can then use that token in trade with somebody else with the knowledge that it will eventually come back round and somebody will take the apple farmer's apples. So Mr. Apple Farmer has 10 apples in his apple vault and he offers you those 10 apples in exchange for whatever goods or services you are offering to him. You don't want the apples, so instead you take the currency, okay? This is a promissory note. This is a note that represents those apples and is as good as those apples. As good, it's worth its weight in apples, so to speak. So that system in itself, on the base level is, it's quite functional. However, there is a slight problem there because if all the apple farmers got together and decided they wanted to reduce the number of apples that were available on the general market, then that would necessarily inflate the value of each individual apple. And this now is the problem with a purely asset-backed currency, something that is backed purely by a commodity, gold, silver, oil, apples. Doesn't matter. When you've got an asset-backed currency, the people who work to generate that specific commodity have the option and the ability to work together to manipulate that market. And when they can manipulate that market, they can artificially raise the price of those apples by, not offering as many of those apples up to sale, sticking them in a field and letting them rot instead to artificially raise the value of each of those apples. Yeah, we've actually got 100 apples, but I'm only going to offer 10 onto the open market. I'm going to let 90 of those apples rot away. And I'm going to keep doing this because that will mean that the apples that I do have now been raised in value themselves. So that's the asset-backed system, and those are the sort of the basic problems with asset-backed currency and commodity-backed currencies, is that as long as it is based on that physical currency, artificial scarcity can be applied in order to raise the value of those apples above their true value on their own. The next thing that came out of this asset-backed currency was the fractional reserve currency system. And what this allowed was it allowed for the apple farmer to create promissory notes for more apples than he has available. And the reason this was done was because it was accepted that most people who were trading for those apples would not all want to come and collect those apples at once. Thus, the odds of getting multiple people turn up requesting more apples than you actually had in storage was fairly low. So these people managed to get away with creating promissory notes for more apples than they actually had. So this same apple farmer still has only 10 apples in his apple vault. But the fractional reserve system of banking says that he is able to lend out 100% more apples than he has available. So he only needs to have 50% of the commodity available compared to the amount that he's loaned out. So this apple farmer has effectively just doubled his money. Because what he can do now, instead of only creating a promissory note for those 10 apples that he has available, he can create promissory notes for 20 apples, despite the fact he only has 10 apples. He can create a promissory note for 2 different customers for those 10 apples, and he's magicked money out of thin air. You can see the basic problem with this now, because you are generating currency without generating the necessary assets or the necessary commodities to back them up. Therefore, the currency itself has become devalued. And this was the first really big step towards allowing the banks, in this case the apple farmer, to start controlling the flow of energy and controlling the flow of trade in society by the manipulation of the asset market to which that currency is attached. In this case, apples. The apple farmer himself, he only has 10 apples, but he can give promissory notes out to people for twice that amount. He only needs to have 50% of the apples available compared to the promissory notes that he's created. The total here, he's created promissory notes for 20 apples, and he only has 10 apples in his storage. Moving on from the fractional reserve banking system, they took that one step further and they went over to the fiat currency system. Now, a fiat currency is not backed at all by assets. It is not backed by commodities. It is backed merely by the trust of the people using that currency and the authority of the entities creating that currency themselves. So now the apple farmer has an apple vault. And the difference is now is that we don't know how many apples he has in that apple vault. He might have 100 apples, he might not have any. But that doesn't matter because he has been given the authority to create promissory notes for apples. So he can just keep creating these promissory notes over and over and over again with no direct connection to the actual apples which they are supposed to represent. And that creates a very, very serious problem because this apple farmer now doesn't actually have to do any real work. He doesn't have to produce any apples at all. All he needs to do is pretend that he has apples and offer everybody promissory notes which are redeemable for those apples. So these are now quite interesting examples of the banking system in themselves. Let's pretend these aren't apple farmers anymore. These are bankers, okay? So in the asset-backed system, he could create a promissory note for 10 apples without actually giving those apples away. If he wasn't providing those promissory notes in direct trade, if he was offering those 10 apples as a loan, he could then request more apples back than he has given out. Instead of the 10 apples that he has loaned to this customer, he now wants 12 apples back. Now, in an asset-based system, there is kind of the argument whereby the apple farmer is taking the risk because he can only create promissory notes for the actual assets that he has. And that sort of system on its own is understandable. However, we do still have the issue whereby the value of that asset can be artificially inflated by cooperation between all the apple farmers in the world. They realise they can start fixing the prices and raise the value of those apples without actually increasing the amount of work that is done to produce those apples and without increasing the volume of apples produced. And the same thing comes here now in the fractional reserve system, except now the problem has been doubled because he only needs to have 50% of the assets that he is loaning out. Again, imagine these now are not actually trading any physical item for those apples. They are loaning those apples, or more specifically, they are loaning the promissory notes for those apples. So now he can create twice as much money without doing any more work, because each of these people now are going to pay him back 12 apples for the 10 apples that they borrowed off him. So now this apple farmer, without doing any extra work, has earned 4 apples out of nowhere. And again, this problem again is exponentially increased when we come over to the system of fiat currency, because this apple farmer doesn't even necessarily have to have any apples anymore. He just has to be determined to be an apple farmer and be given that authority to create those promissory notes. So again, without doing any work at all, he doesn't even need to have any apples in his apple vault. He can keep lending out these apple tokens to as many people as he likes, ad infinitum. Ad infinitum, forever. Always requesting more apples than are available in the actual economy itself. And the problem here now is, if we have 10 customers and they all loan 10 apples, that's 100 apples that are now needed to be paid back to the farmer. The problem that we have now is that the farmer doesn't only want 100 apples back, he wants 120 apples back. So 2 of these customers are going to be completely unable to pay back their debt, and they will have their assets removed from them in payment of the loan that was first put out by the apple farmer. You are putting more credit, more debt into the system than you are able to then extract from it, which means those people who cannot generate these promissory notes in order to pay back the apple farmer will then necessarily have to pay back that debt with other actual living assets. And this is the game of musical chairs in which we are all involved. If you liked my content, don't forget to hit the subscribe button, and thank you very much for watching this far. Hit the thumbs up so that I know that you liked it, and don't forget to hit that notification bell, set it to all so you are always kept up to date with all my latest content. I upload on Mondays, Wednesdays and Fridays at 8 p.m. UK times. If you'd like to communicate with me personally, please head over to lawfulbank.com. It is a lawful knowledge bank of real people with real sovereign true information who are working together to self-organise and replace the corrupt government and financial system which rules us. Thank you very much for watching. That just leaves me to say take care, guys. Don't forget to stay free, think free, act free, and I will see you next time.